Welcome to another episode of Stats and Scheme. I am Shawn, Syed, joined as always by my good friend Seth. Another long weekend of football. We got through New Year's Eve. We're here in 2024. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good, Shawn. I was a bad friend to you, I think, during the holidays. I made you edit on both Christmas Day and New Year's Day with some of the articles that we put up on sumersports.com. But I felt like I had to provide people with the content that they look for. And so I appreciated you, taking some time to aside from your family to actually do that for me.
You know that both of our first year in this, we don't have to worry about writing like 2023 or 2024 on our like school papers anymore. So, I'm always more than happy to do it. All right. So today we'll talk about some Lions Cowboys. We'll talk just a little bit of Cardinals Eagles, of course, Dolphins Ravens, and then look ahead to Bills Dolphins next week. Is it okay if we start with the Lions offense versus Cowboys defense?
Yeah, let's do it. And, I think the Lions offense had an up and down game. I think when you look at it from a stats perspective, they relied on the two ends of the distributions in this game. When we look at a stat like explosive play rate and a stat like negative play rate, we usually expect those to be around 10% for both of those because that's what they're based off of. They're based off of the 10th and 90th percentile outcomes for plays. The Lions had a 15.4% explosive play rate in this game, which is 89th percentile. They also had an 18.5% negative play rate, which is third percentile. So they were just living on both ends of the distribution in this game. They had the deep shot to Jameis Williams. Sam Laporta had some really big explosives, especially on the last drive of the game. But then you had the two interceptions. You had multiple runs get stuffed up the middle. So it wasn't a typical Lions game where they had a high success rate. They were more just relying on hitting those deep balls against a really good Cowboys defense that played them well.
Yeah, the explosives point is super interesting because it feels like I think it's a smart way for the Cowboys defense to be playing because they are going to play light boxes. They're going to be in that dime personnel a lot, extra DB bodies on the field. They're down multiple linebackers. Obviously, I think their defense is led by that really strong pass rush unit. So they're going to have players attack gaps and get up the field. And that is going to result in some tackles for loss. And I thought in this game we saw, and you pointed this out, I thought really well in our weekend review, is that some of those runs up the middle where the running back is kind of stuttering just a little bit. When you knife inside on a gap, you're able to get after the running back where he doesn't have a lot of ways to go. But then the Lions were able to succeed on some of those kind of outside zone runs where if a player is just kind of blitzing a gap and not blitzing in the sense of sending an extra player, but really attacking that gap and getting upfield, the offensive line, I thought, did a good job of kind of turning and sealing those players off. So that was able to, like, you allow Gibbs and Montgomery, they can read it out one gap at a time and just make defenders wrong, where of course the Cowboys were still able to kind of get explosives off of that. So I don't know how you feel about that. Just like it's kind of a boomer bust approach, but I kind of love it like that. I feel like that's how I would love to play too, as a defense, where you're getting enough, if you can't, or if you don't feel comfortable about your rush defense success rate on a down and down basis, and you create one explosive on a first down, now it's 2nd and 12, that offense may get a little bit less comfortable. Their play sheet shrinks. It looks just a little bit different. I love that as a way to play defense.
Exactly. And, I was surprised that the Lions weren't able to have more success against the Cowboys defense. I think that they played this game really well. Their run fits have seemed like they have been a lot better these past 2 weeks against the Dolphins and Lions compared to what they were against the Bills the week before. And like you mentioned, from a rushing success rate perspective, when Lions were running up the middle, they had an 18% success rate on those rushes. And when they ran outside, they had a 50% success rate on those rushes. And you think about the way that David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs were able to generate some of the explosive runs on their own. Most of those rushes were outside in this game. So left side of the offensive line had a bad day in general. I thought that when Micah Parsons was lined up on Penei Sewell at right tackle, Sewell was able to neutralize him, much like he did in the Lions-Cowboys matchup last year. But when Parsons was lined up against Jonah Jackson at left guard and Taylor Decker at left tackle, Parsons was able to wreak havoc in both the run and the pass game. So I think just as a whole, this is what we're going to see more of from the Lions offense from a game plan perspective. It was a low pass rate over expected, negative 13.9%, which is 6th percentile. It was also a low ADOT game from Jared Goff, which we've seen now for 3 weeks in a row. He had a 7.2 ADOT in this game. They really want to rely on yards after the catch and making sure that he's not pressured, because we know what happens when he's pressured. So I think that's going to be the common theme of the Lions as we head into the playoffs.
The Parsons Sewell battle was so fun. I did think there were certainly snaps, particularly in the run game, where I think Parsons did a good job kind of shedding off of him. And I mean, if you can do that against Penny Sewell, you can kind of do that against anyone. And Michael Parsons, I mean, he obviously can. I do like, that pressure that you kind of mentioned on that first interception. I thought it was a really nice design where I'm pretty sure they had Montgomery and Gibbs on the field at the same time. They have Montgomery kind of that fake jet motion. It becomes like a double play action screen where defenders really have to track that. And unfortunately, the Cowboys defender did a really good job of tracking that. But at the same time, the defensive line, I think on the interior, got a really quick pressure on Goff, and that maybe kind of sped him up a little bit. And then that second interception, your defense just in cover 3, that flat player is going to take that second receiver out. If that ball is just a touch behind, that is a really, really big problem. I do think Detroit's, like, their use of motion is just consistently fun to watch. It was good in week 1 against the Chiefs. It is still good now. They're going to force defenses into different checks, whether it's they're using a simple formation that's a little bit more spread out, and now they're motioning their receiver in, which gets them into like a moving bunch, and then the defense is going to want to really quickly get to their bunch check. So, and once the defense is just like a touch late in the secondary, that means Amon-Ra St. Brown is kind of going to be open. And of course, against a Dallas Cowboys defense that wants to play cover 1 really, really often, that motion can make it a little bit harder for people to track kind of who is where or who is in which position. And then that doesn't even mention in the run game, Jameer Gibbs, he just really, I think, moves at a different speed. At least that's what it looks like. I don't know how you've been feeling at Gibbs. I feel like he's consistently popping out on really all of our charts in terms of explosive run rate and things like that. So I don't know, what have your thoughts been on Gibbs this late into the season?
Yeah, just to touch on your motion point real quickly, Lions are 8th in motion rate on the season at 40.3%. They're 9th in play action rate at 21.3%. So things we like to see from Ben Johnson there. And yeah, to add on with Gibbs, like, I think Gibbs has been really, really good. Has definitely exceeded my expectations from what I expected from him as a rookie. And, we talked about this previously, but like, the Lions have this really nice thunder and lightning going on with their running backs, where David Montgomery is the high success rate, someone that can convert short yardage on late downs for you, which the Lions like going to him in those situations. And then Jahmyr Gibbs is the rusher that you want when you are looking for that explosive run play that we've been talking about, where, he has a 12.3% explosive run rate on the season this year, which is only behind Devin Achane and Christian McCaffrey. So he's done a great job from that perspective. And then his yards created, when you adjust for down distance, yard line, and box defenders, has been plus 0.72 this year, which is 9th in the league, behind some pretty good running backs up there as well. So I think Jahmyr Gibbs has done a really good job from that sense.
Yeah, the thunder and lightning. I know you love that, Tej. We'll decide off air which one of us is thunder, which one of us is lightning. We can have the debate there. I do think the Lions really came out in the second half super, super dedicated to the run, even more than they already were coming into the game, which I thought was a really smart decision. Of course, as you mentioned, they had that big play to Jameson Williams over the top, where even when the defense is in that too high shell, the safety is still going to relate to that second receiver. So it still becomes a true one-on-one outside. And I thought Williams did a really, really nice job. Just threaten outside just enough before breaking up and inside. And then we didn't even mention that fake punt was awesome, where I think everyone, when you face the Lions, you're aware, okay, they may snap it to the up back. That up back may take it on a little bit of run, but to add on another layer of that and have your up back throw it to that outside gunner, that was really, really awesome. And I think just constantly, how many times, Tej, are we going to say this year, oh, great play design by Ben Johnson. So, that fake punt, to be watching a team and just not know what's going on fourth down, I think is really, really exciting. I do want to talk about that last drive just a little bit. It felt like on the live copy, are the Cowboys playing soft here? What's going on? Watching it back on tape, I thought that the Cowboys really wanted to get into a lot of their too high safety rotations. And I wouldn't call it playing it conservative, but you get into more of those cover 2 shell looks, or they played a bunch of 2-man. And then I thought the Lions wanted to be in 3-by-1 sets where they could have Amon-Ra St. Brown isolated on the backside versus Steph Gilmore, where Gilmore's gonna, in those situations, he played a little bit more off. As you mentioned, that drive I thought was a really nice Sewell versus Micah drive, but just good from Goff and kind of good from Laporta. So, Tej, do you want to talk about anything else here, or do you think it's time we talk about that 2-point decision?
Yeah, I mean, begrudgingly, I think we should talk about the 2-point decision.
Yes. Yeah, so we don't have to talk about whatever, like the officiating, the refs. I think there's been a lot of good coverage there, but the initial decision to go for 2, I think personally, I love that. That is a great thing to do. Why would you want to play in overtime? You're on the road. I think that the Cowboys were favorites in the game. Would I put them at favorites at that point? Yeah, probably. Their defense was playing quite well, and Lions on offense were figuring it out and getting kind of hung up in the red zone a little bit. So they go for it once, have a absolutely just gorgeous play design. Obviously, there's tons of bad that came out of the result there, but one of the things that was lost is such a good play design where you're starting an empty, where Penei Sewell is kind of bumped out as your 6th lineman. You're motioning people back in. You get full flow. Your tackle is leaking out to the outside wide open. It was like kind of a contested catch late. So a shout out to the lineman that ended up catching it. Of course, we all know there was the whatever illegal formation, and there was another like illegal touching, I think, that however they justified the penalty. So now you're moving back to the 7-yard line. Go for it again. Cowboys defense, I think, ended up with an interception there, but offsides on Michael Parsons. Jumped the snap just a touch without able to get back. So I think that they bought the ball back to around like the 3. So, and then you go for it one more time where Tej, I hate to say it, but I thought actually Goff had that player open. That was a really good example where you get to a kind of non-traditional bunch where your outside receiver is running inside quick. They have 2 tight ends on the field. That outbreaker, I don't know. I don't like to speculate too much. I think a good throw or a perfect throw may have helped him kind of get in there. So you go for it 3 times. So I'll let you kind of cook on it first. What your thoughts on everything there? The floor is yours on this one, Tej.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about this when we were recording here on that first conversion. So it ends up going to Taylor Decker, who was number 68. They announced number 70 was eligible. And I saw an argument that people were making that I'm pretty neutral on, was that the Cowboys would have guarded Taylor Decker, number 68, if the announcement was made correctly, because they apparently shifted over to guard number 70, even though he was ineligible, based on his alignment, I think. So would you have seen that, do you think, if they got the call right, that the Cowboys defense would have shifted over, guarded Decker, and we wouldn't have been talking about this anyways?
Tish, you're getting me into speculation territory. I will say my dad and brother were at the game in Arlington, and they said that they didn't hear what was said on the speaker. When you look at the replay, you can hear them kind of say that person was eligible. I would say that, I don't know. I think that they could tell you exactly who was eligible. I don't think it would have been guarded, is my personal feeling. I thought that it was, again, a testament to the Lions, their play calling, how they dressed it up. And we see plays every week where it's tight ends that are getting wide open there. We'll see like fullbacks where the Ravens are able to do both, that we'll talk about just a little bit later. So I don't think that it is, hey, the defense knows this player is eligible. They still have to play the play. I think that we would be surprised about how often the defenses know exactly what is coming to them, and they are not able to stop it because there are so many things that are moving at full speed. So I personally feel like, can I say it definitively? Probably not either way, but I don't know. I think they could have said it on the loudspeaker. They probably would have said it. Like, it's based on formation. Like, you're looking at it from a formation aspect, not a number aspect anyway. So it's like, well, this is the end player on the line of scrimmage. They are not covered. This is an eligible receiver, as in eligible, not ineligible. Just want to make sure that clear for my voice. But no, I don't think that it would have been guarded, even if they knew that was the player. I do like the Lions being a little bit cheeky, kind of sending 3 people at the ref. Unfortunately, it ends up coming back to bite them. But what do you think, Tish? You think that would have made some kind of major difference?
No, I agree with you. I don't think it would have made a ton of difference. And I think your explanation makes a lot of sense. And I mean, like you mentioned, like, I think it was such a genius idea to come up with sending multiple people at the ref, not tipping your hand at who was going to be the 6th offensive lineman that was going to be eligible to catch the ball, and then kind of taking, maybe the crowd noise into account, with knowing that the Cowboys defense wouldn't be able to hear the announcement. And the Lions had sent in Dan Skipper, who's number 70, on 2 separate plays previously in that game before the 2-point decision. So it was maybe something they were setting up throughout the game where they were going to send Dan Skipper in. He didn't even talk to the ref, but it was going to be an alert to the Cowboys that there's something to watch for. And then they would leak out to Taylor Decker for the conversion to be successful there. So, I think it just really came down to the Lions having too good of a plan where it ended up confusing the officials. And, I think that after that, they probably should have kicked the extra point. When you look at fourth downs from each various type of yard line and how often they end up becoming a touchdown, you have a 54% chance from the +1 to get a touchdown. From the +2, that goes to a 45% chance. And then when you go after that, that goes below 40% for each subsequent yard line after. So for the Lions to go for 2 from the +7, I think was a very aggressive decision. Next Gen Stats said they made the correct decision on the first go for it decision, which was a +2.7% win probability added. After that, though, it was -13.5% to go from the Dallas 7, and then -2.5% to go from the Dallas 3. So those were suboptimal decisions, but I think that, he just wanted the aggressiveness, and Dan Campbell ended up coming out later and saying that if it was the 10-yard line or further back, they would have ended up kicking the extra point.
I like that. I was thinking in my head, would it be, okay, if you get penalties to the 50-yard line, are you going to take it then? Or what is really the extreme of this? I do think there's something to be said of that play was so designer and so clearly set up for if we get into just like a really, really tight situation, exactly like that 2-point play. So I think when I was watching the Vikings last year, and Kevin O'Connell would have like one really, really good 4th and 1 call, and then they would have it flagged, and then he would punt or something off of that. And he would say in post-game interviews, like I had one really, really good call that I felt confident, and I didn't think that there were that many others that we could get to in those situations. So I do think there's something to be said of how many plays do you feel comfortable with at that point? And unfortunately, that again, as I said, that third time, I thought it was a great design. So maybe they had just a lot of things in the bag. I do think, once you get to that 7-yard line, that's a kick situation in my mind, but I'm never gonna argue with aggressiveness. I know that both of us are really, really excited to see that. And hey, we may get a rematch, but why don't we talk a little bit about the other side of the ball? So Cowboys offense versus Lions defense. I thought something that stood out pretty frequently, unfortunately, in this one was it felt like the Cowboys were burning first downs a little bit, where they were, I don't know, maybe they would have been better getting back to kind of their like outside zone duo attack, where they ran counter a few times where it just didn't look particularly well. I do think I will say that the Lions defense interior did actually a really, really good job here. I thought they were pretty dedicated to stuffing the box, and that left one-on-ones outside, where I think then later on in the game, we saw a little bit more of just play action, kind of quick throws to CeeDee Lamb on the outside. So that was just kind of an initial feeling. I know we'll go through a bunch of other things on that, but Tej, why don't you talk a little bit about the Cowboys offense versus the Lions defense?
I'm with you with the run game. I think that the quicker they can move away from the run game in these games, the more beneficial it's going to be for them. They had a 9th percentile EPA per rush in this game. Tony Pollard had -6.8 total EPA when he was rushing. But luckily, the Dak Prescott to CeeDee Lamb connection is at such a high level right now that it can bail them out of almost any situation. So much so that you have the 93-yard touchdown to CeeDee Lamb, which was the most EPA added on a single offensive Cowboys play since at least 1999, which is as far as our data goes back to. And just feeding CeeDee Lamb is going to be so successful for them. CeeDee Lamb had a 43.6% target share in this game. He had a 59% success rate when targeted. That was the highest success rate when targeted of any player on the team. And they're continuing to move away from Michael Gallup and towards their other receiving options. Brandon Cooks had a 23% target share. Jake Ferguson had a 15% target share. And both of those were above 50% on success rate. So I think as long as the Cowboys keep continuing to pass at a high rate and to target Lamb, Cooks, and Ferguson in that order, they're going to continue to have these pretty good day on offense, except when they're not burning the first downs, like you mentioned, when running the ball.
We say build the plane out of CeeDee Lamb, but now it feels like it is a private charter, first-class jet with all out of CeeDee Lamb. I agree with you. It's just fun to watch him play, and he kind of, I'm not sure if it's unorthodox, but it it's also obviously he's moving at such a high speed and he's so quick and so agile, able to get kind of in and out of breaks. But when he's in the slot and he can threaten you breaking out or breaking in, it is just really, really impossible to guard one-on-one, especially when so many times in those looks, especially if a defense is playing cover one, the man coverage player is going to be in a little bit of outside leverage when if they want to funnel the receiver kind of deep and inside, or if there's a middle of the field kind of a lower player. But even then, CD has no trouble getting open. So I was thinking about when I was watching the film, I was like, oh, well, do you want to make sure you're doubling him more often? But again, I thought that Detroit wanted to stay in that one high look, stuff that box in the run game, which again, they were very clearly successful doing that. I also think that the Lions, they wanted to pressure, which Dak, I think, has been really, really good against pressure. This was an exceptional game, I thought, against pressure, where he is super comfortable, super confident, and just getting the ball out quick enough. But that could have been a safety to end it up as a touchdown play. That's probably like the biggest swing of a play that I think I can remember, where you're literally looking at it and unfortunately the defender just pretty much like runs into him, isn't able to bring him down, and it ends up in a touchdown. I'm not even going to ask if you can think of a bigger one, because I don't think it's like the quarterback sneak where it's like a 1 yard run, but it turns into a fumble kind of going the other way. So that's a huge swing. I think the EPA on that one, obviously, and the win probability is so big. So I wonder if this becomes a rematch. Is it the same kind of approach on Detroit where you get into those heavy boxes, you're able to just kill the run game? But even that, as you said, the pass rate I thought was keep on kind of jacking it up. I think McCarthy's done a good job in the pass game in so many different ways. There was a really nice play where when Cooks runs that wheel, he's actually the receiver that starts on the line of scrimmage. A lot of times when we see teams run that kind of pick wheel, that receiver will start off the line, but by him being on the line, the defense sets up in like different levels so they can't get picked off, and that defender is all the way up on him. So that's just like so much kind of things to work through. So overall, I thought it was a really, really fun game, a back and forth that sometimes when we look at games that defenses are successful kind of consistently, we look, oh man, not enough points. But I thought this was just kind of a good battle back and forth. Tej, what else you got on this matchup?
I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that the one thing that would probably change if we see a rematch is Cam Sutton would be moved off of CeeDee Lamb a lot more than he was on him in this game. It's nothing against Cam Sutton. He was playing injured in this game. He's had a fine season. I just think that at this point in the season, Brian Branch is the healthier and better defensive back. Brian Branch has a negative 8.3% completion percentage over expected when targeted this season, which is 9th among all safeties in the league. Cam Sutton has a positive 0.5% completion percentage over expected when targeted, which is 62nd among corners. He's done fine at making sure that he's not targeted often by good coverage, but when he is targeted, he lets up a little bit more of catches over average, while I think Brian Branch has done a really, really good job breaking up passes this year. So if we do see that rematch, I think Branch would get moved on to CeeDee Lamb a little bit more, especially when Lamb is in the slot, and then Sutton would work on the other receivers like Cooks and Anzalone would get matched up on Ferguson. I think that would be Aaron Glenn's best attack if we see this again in the playoffs.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see, because I think the Cowboys have done a decent job of getting CD enough snaps outside where if Branch is the player that, say he just in an imaginary world, he ends up just like totally Xing him out in the slot, you move him outside and you get totally different matchups. I'm glad you mentioned Jake Ferguson. I thought Dak just continues to throw ridiculous balls in the seam that are so beautiful. I thought the Lions defenders were able to kind of get their hands on the ball a little bit, but I'm sure we'll see some more of those throws. And then now after that win, the Cowboys kind of go up to the number one team in the NFC East. They just got to beat the Commanders to lock up the division. And that is thanks in part to the Cardinals beating the Eagles. So I just want to talk just a little bit about the Cardinals offense versus the Eagles defense. Tej, we don't need to spend too much time on it, but going through the film, I thought the Cardinals did a really good job just attacking the B gap bubble. So that kind of, if you have an over front, so a defensive line is usually lined up to a run strength. So they're kind of have their three technique between that guard and the tackle, usually to a tight end side that leaves this kind of big space on the backside in the run game. And the Cardinals did a good job pulling their guard, just running simple kind of power and counter and other things where they were just able to consistently have strong leverage on the Eagles defensive line, take advantage of the linebackers. And then James Conner looks like he is he could play middle linebacker for the Eagles for 10 years, just the way that he was kind of running people over. So Tej, why don't you give us a little bit on that Cardinals offense versus Eagles defense?
I'm glad that you mentioned James Conner because I think he's been having an underrated season, actually. Like, I think when you look at advanced metrics, and maybe it's because, the Cardinals haven't been, in the national spotlight as much as other teams this season. Like, James Conner ranks pretty highly in all these different metrics that we look at when we're evaluating running backs. He ranks 5th in EPA per rush. He ranks, he ranks in the top 5 for yards created, that metric I was talking about earlier, that adjusts for game situation variables. And then when you even compare him to the other running backs on his team, he gets 0.8 yards per carry over the other running backs when they run the ball on this team. And he had a big game in this game, having 5.6 total EPA. And the Cardinals really could choose their own adventure for how they wanted to score on the Eagles. And they did in this game, where they had a 92nd percentile EPA per rush. They had an 85th percentile EPA per pass. Kyler Murray had 13.5 total EPA, and that's including a pick 6 that was taken back all the way on a miscommunication. And this was without Hollywood Brown, who was ruled out for the season before this game. Greg Dortch was their leading receiver in this game with 9.6 total EPA. So it was really just a masterclass of offense from the Cardinals. And then you look at the Eagles from a defensive perspective, and since they've made their defensive coordinator switch from Shawn to Matt Patricia, they've ranked 28th in EPA per play, 26th in success rate, 22nd against the pass, and 30th against the run. They were 22nd in success rate before making this coordinator change. So they've dropped from 22nd to 26th in success rate. So I think the Eagles defense at this point is more of a personnel issue than it is a schematic issue. And, I think that you have been looking at the Eagles defense closely this year, and can probably share more thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that one of the unfortunate parts about this is if I told you the Cardinals had 200 or like 250 rush yards on any defense, usually you feel like this was going to be at least somewhat quarterback influence in terms of Kyler Murray can really affect the run game, but that wasn't the case in this game at all. It wasn't a situation where Kyler is holding 1.5 defenders consistently in the read game. It was really downhill. It was really at you, and it was really in your face. I do think the Eagles, they absolutely have a personnel problem, which is natural when you have cluster injuries or multiple injuries at the same position. You're getting free agents, and it's not even to say, hey, the Eagles need to totally flip their team building aspects and, okay, they need to draft or pay tons of money to a huge linebacker. But if you're on linebacker number 6 for the season, you're not going to have a good time against the Cardinals rush offense. I do think from a schematic perspective, the Eagles, they ended up dropping Hassan Reddick into coverage like I think 8 or 10 times, which if you look at that in isolation and say, oh, don't drop your best pass rusher, I understand that. I think I do generally agree with that. They have it when you're in a 5-down front, that defensive end to one side, if you only want to end up rushing 4, one of them is going to end up dropping out. So they have Reddick be that. The problem there was that the Cardinals it felt like they were able to manipulate it. They understood that it was going to be Reddick. They knew how to isolate him, when to isolate him, and why to isolate him. And yeah, I don't expect him to be kind of making great plays in pass coverage. That's not what the Eagles pay him to do. So I understand if I think the coaches come out and say, oh, we want to be a little bit unpredictable on defense. Unpredictability is not always the best thing when you're able to do it. And then the offense just says, okay, we'll just go ahead and take our slot receiver against one of your best pass rushers in space. So overall, I think a frustrating game, certainly for the Eagles. A lot of implications off that game where they could have really locked up that division. After that, they go and face the Giants next week. And as you mentioned, the Eagles coordinator changes. They'll obviously they will have a new defensive coordinator at the start of next season. I assume then Shawn, who is the start coordinator at the beginning of this year. And Tage, just a headache, I think, for Eagles fans. But you go to teams, or now you look at some of the best coordinators in the league, the Ravens offense versus the Dolphins defense. That game was a lot of fun for a lot of reasons. And assuming that Todd Monken is there again for a second year, if he doesn't become a head coach or something of that nature, I'm so excited to see the Ravens offense in year 2, where they're succeeding so much in year 1. But when you get to another year in the system, now you're not just kind of building the foundation. You can see with the Lions too, you're figuring out, okay, well, how do we get to different answers against the problems we saw in our first year? and what we assume we're going to kind of face in our second year. And then I think that Lamar is going to continue to get more empowerment at the line of scrimmage, where in this game and really all season, Tish, he has played so well from the pocket. He has been so relaxed. In this game, he was not, he didn't rush his process at all. He has like a funky way to kind of move up real quick and almost look like he's jumping and throwing, but he is good at waiting for things to open up and not bailing on the play, which allows the offense to call some of those more down the field pass concepts. And you can't just say, we're going to make him play from the pocket, or, you know, we can just kind of mush rush and assume he's going to make a mistake, because he's not. He's playing so well from the pocket. It's been so fun to see that. I think that he kind of vaulted back up in the MVP rankings, and just, I think, in everyone's regard. So Tish, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the Ravens offense versus the Dolphins defense?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that Lamar's floor from a production standpoint was average 16th, and that's what EPA showed when things were not going right with him, where Greg Roman had lost some juice as offense coordinator. The receiving options just weren't there, especially at wide receiver, but they were littered with injuries and just talent deficiency across the board. And I thought that his ceiling was always MVP level, which he showed in 2019. He's showing again this season. And that's exactly what we're seeing, but it's a different style of how he's winning MVP this year, which is, I think, the most impressive thing to all of us. When you look at his yards per attempt, so just his passes, he ranked 19th in 2020. He ranked 10th in 2021. He ranked 23rd last season. And this season, he ranks 4th in yards per attempt across the whole league. So even when you don't include his rushing ability, his ability to avoid sacks, what he can do from a design rush and scramble perspective, he's the 4th best overall passer in the league this year. Then you add in what he's able to do from a rushing perspective, how he leads the league in rush yards among all quarterbacks, and that takes his game to another level. He had 26-point total EPA in this game. Zay Flowers was the main beneficiary of the receiving options, and he has 3 receivers now that are all above the 40th percentile mark for yards per route run, which I think means that they're playable on the field, with Odell Beckham, Zay Flowers, and Rashad Bateman. And then Nelson Aguilar, I think, has also had an underrated year. And these tight ends like Likely and Kohler have stepped up with the absence of Mark Andrews as well. And everything has come together in a cohesive way under Todd Monken's offense. And I think that's been really fun to watch this year.
It feels like these are Lamar's best receivers. So this is the best receiving crew he's had. So it's awesome to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and give Lamar Jackson the best receiving crew, even with Mark Andrews out, and him be able to do this. So that's been fun to see. I just think that they were able to manufacture explosive plays in this game, which is really, really hard. And for every single defense, their priority, especially a Fangio defense, is going to be prioritizing stopping those explosive plays, make you take 13, 14, 15 play drives. But the Ravens used some double moves that ended up being successful. They really had a good understanding of when that weak side linebacker had to play man coverage on the running back, and then force that player into space in all sorts of different ways, whether it's, a pick from that outside receiver where they end up getting called on it once, but then they'd run on it later in the game. And I thought that they did a good job avoiding Jalen Ramsey. Why would we throw at him? We don't need to. And a lot of those coverages, those 3-by-1 sets on the backside, the Dolphins are happy to lock Jalen Ramsey in one-on-one coverage, which, as I said, puts that weak linebacker in all sorts of a bind. So one thing that it maybe not bothered me, but I was a little bit surprised by, was the Ravens use that fast motion that the Dolphins use a lot of. So you figure that the Dolphins defense is attuned to that in multiple different ways, but the Ravens had caused multiple coverage busts with that. So we talked a little bit before about how if you're a cornerback in these match coverages, his final responsibility is really relating to that number one receiver, which when you draw it up on Madden, if you're in cover 4, that guy's going to keep on dropping back. But if that receiver runs something short, the cornerback still has to lock onto that. There's obviously rules where if he runs underneath, the cornerback's going to drop off of that. But that means that the safety and the linebacker are kind of connected to that second receiver. But when you're moving at the snap, the way the Ravens were and the way the Dolphins do, the way that we see teams kind of across the league do it, then you're not really even sure, well, who is the number 1 now? Who is the number 2 now? Do we do it after the snap? And usually teams will just kind of back off and zone it off, as opposed to kind of staying locked in those coverages. But that was something where I was like, oh, the Ravens were able to really cause problems for the Dolphins that, Tej, I don't want to be in film with Vic Fangio this week. I'm sure that there was a lot of things said about, well, how, like, these are our checks. These are what we're kind of putting together, but we weren't able to do it. So just overall, I think it's hard to say that any team is better than the Ravens right now. Obviously, it's a little bit results driven, but now we're seeing Odell Beckham Jr. back out here catching these fades where it felt like Lamar was kind of changing that play at the line of scrimmage. Was there any other plays or anything else kind of you felt just watching that Ravens offense have fun against the Dolphins?
Yeah, the one play I wanted to get your thoughts on was the play that was going viral on Twitter when Lamar threw a deep touchdown pass to Zay Flowers, where he started in the pocket facing like a lefty would, where even it looked like he would have thrown from a lefty perspective. And people were saying that the Dolphins defenders were all moving towards that side of the field, that a lefty would throw to more often. And then he ended up throwing it to the right side of the field and hitting him for a touchdown. And it wasn't a coverage bust. It was more of Lamar being good in the pocket. Is that what the film ended up showing for you when you went back and watched it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix. Now, I don't think any of the Dolphins receivers Dolphins cornerbacks, that linebacker in coverage in that situation thought Lamar was a lefty. I don't think that was an issue. I do think that they felt that he was rolling out to the left, which that's a smart thing. I think that the 49ers do that fairly frequently where you'll see Purdy kind of turn the other way. And because that is happening, if your cornerback has vision through the quarterback, they can feel that rollout going the other way. That entices you into thinking, well, the receiver kind of outside here is more of a runoff route where it's just really hard to get that if you're rolling out and then throwing across your whole entire body. That gives you more space for the defense to kind of catch up. So I thought that it was a little bit actually more on, like I said, that motion, because the motion at the snap there where you get into that moving stack and you're not sure who's number one, you're not sure who's number two, and the linebacker and the cornerback miscommunicate it. And I think we can't even say, well, who is fully responsible. I think you may say, well, the linebacker has to cover that, whoever the number two is, up and out. So they should take that vertical. But if they've decided after the snap, then you're moving in that direction. That way, then it's on the cornerback. So someone is obviously at fault. I just thought that, if I remember correctly, I think they were in fire zone. I think the defense ended up sending 5. So you have your 3 deep, 3 under. It's just like an unfortunate situation where I thought throughout the game, the Dolphins didn't do a great job of relating to that, not simple motion, but a motion that we see over and over. And that is something that obviously has to get hammered down, because that is kind of like a basic thing in the NFL now, where you have to know exactly how you're relating in that situation. May have been a situation where the corner felt like, okay, the linebacker is probably taking this, probably more frequently than not, you're going to probably blame the cornerback in that one. So a nice job by the offense to have something where we're going to sell flow one way. Lamar has the ability to pop back really quickly and kind of make that throw, but just on the defensive end, I would look more to the defense making kind of an error on, well, communicate it or just figure it out post-snap. Obviously, hammer down your rules on how you kind of deal with that situation. Another one, or 2 other ones that we got to talk about, is Todd Monken in the red zone, just really, really cooking, where they're selling that play one way. You get your tight end or even your fullback kind of leaking out to the other side, stress the linebacker's eyes. The Ravens did that, where they stressed the linebacker and the cornerback's eyes on that fake rollout, but on those 2 kind of leak plays in the red zone for pretty much easy touchdowns, make sure your leaker sells that block, and then you're banking on that linebacker to the opposite side of where your kind of run action goes. If that linebacker's eyes get caught just a little bit and you do a smart enough job of really being able to conflict him, then it's just kind of easy pickings for the Ravens. So overall, just a really, really good day, I think, for Todd Monken and the Ravens offense.
Ravens red zone offense has been great this year. 3rd in EPA per play when in the red zone. They've done a good job of both passing and rushing the ball in the red zone as well. And Gus Edwards keeps getting touchdowns from the 1 to 3 yard line, which I think won a couple people their fantasy football championships this past weekend. So I think all of it together has been really fun to watch, especially when they get down from the plus 20 and in.
Yeah, and equally as fun to watch is the Ravens defense. We'll talk a little bit, Tage, about Ravens defense versus Dolphins offense. Roquan Smith just consistently telling us all that we need to value linebackers and showing just how good he is. Something that I like that they do is they play different techniques, which of course every team is going to play different techniques with the linebackers, but they will allow Roquan to really play off of Tua's eyes, where you get that interception, which was awesome, where they're in a drop 8. It's a backside dig. It is not something I think that most quarterbacks are going to expect the linebacker to be able to kind of get over to. And then other times they're going to be in techniques where they have their linebackers really looking directly at receivers and running directly to receivers to mess with leverage a little bit, to create like kind of functional double teams. And they're able to really, really succeed in those situations. And then Roquan Smith's ability to really just eat up space, it does make other players' lives easier, where they can have maybe not easier assignments, but different assignments that require them to do a little bit less, where really all game the Ravens felt like they were squeezing those routes, where even against the Cowboys, I think just last week we saw different situations where the Cowboys defenders had to play so far off, they're threatened by that vertical, and then they can kind of cut underneath. So obviously a testament to Mike McDonald and all of the job that the Ravens have done on defense. Obviously having no Jalen Waddle, that I think is a big deal, where you have one less threat to worry about. But it feels like whatever that the Dolphins rolled out, really after that first quarter, it would have been a good game for the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, Roquan Smith, I think, is really interesting from like a positional value standpoint. We talk about premium versus non-premium positions, and what I have kind of settled on is linebackers and tight ends are the same from a positional value standpoint, where like the top 5 in the league are very, very important. And oftentimes that side of the ball goes through them and revolves around them. But then the delta between like the 6th best and the 20th best is a lot smaller than between the 6th best and 20th best of another position, like edge rusher or something like that. And I think that's where kind of it stands from what perspective you're looking at in regards to how you value linebackers. And like you mentioned, like Roquan Smith is just so important for this Ravens defense. And, really just what the Ravens did from the second quarter onward. Dolphins did have a positive EPA in the first quarter. They should have had 2 touchdowns, if it wasn't for a drop in the end zone. And then after that, I think Mike McDonald adjusted really well. Ravens had the 3rd best EPA per play allowed in quarters 2 through 4 on Sunday, only behind the Jaguars and Texans, who were playing bad offenses, and the Ravens were matched up against a pretty high-powered Dolphins offense. So again, very impressive performance from that side of the ball as well.
The tight end to linebacker comparison is interesting. So when we think of like TJ Hawkinson, it's almost a little bit, I think, I'm not sure if you agree, like a market inefficiency, where if you have a tight end that is really at that top end, you're going to pay them way less, or maybe not way less, but like their like APY is going to be significantly less than what the top end receiver is making. So it's like almost like not a cheat code, but you can kind of like, okay, we're paying a player that is functionally playing as our like 2nd best receiver, but way less money than we would pay kind of a number 2 receiver. So I do think that's interesting. Where a linebacker, I guess there's not the direct like, okay, this player is going to play cornerback for us, because they obviously don't do that. I do think there's always something to be said about the players that are able to take things off of the plate of other players. Fred Warner is a great example, where your whole entire coverage structure is able to shift, because if you feel comfortable with your linebacker in coverage on guys like CeeDee Lamb, like we saw kind of Fred Warner on a few different plays in the playoffs last year, the whole entire defensive coverage is able to be more flexible. You can keep whatever your nickel, your cornerback, and your safety over the outside 2 receivers and not feel as stressed out about that kind of 3rd receiver in the slot. So I like that you brought that up. I'm sure that's probably something we'll talk about more in the offseason. But Tej, you know me, positional value, of course, it is very, very important. We just got to appreciate some of these players. Like now you got me out here appreciating Patrick Queen, who I think he's even playing at a high level. I think that is a testament to the Ravens linebacker coach as well. But also, as I said, his responsibilities are able to be different. I think if you flip like his role and he has to do what Roquan's doing, there's like 2.5 linebackers in the whole entire league that can do what Roquan's doing. So I think that is really special. And then obviously in this game, there was no Kyle Hamilton, which was unfortunate. Obviously on an injury, you want to see him back to full health, but for the Ravens to be able to do this with no Kyle Hamilton kind of on, that was really, really fun. And I think the Ravens defense overall does a good job of, it feels like they're not just married to a single call, where sometimes it feels like at the college level, particularly like a defense will make a call and it's like, it's not getting checked based on the formation, but the Ravens are so flexible in making just like small adjustments, whether when a set is condensed or when there's a quick formational shift, like those fast motions that the Dolphins use, that they're doing a great job. They're able to stop those really important misdirection plays where Tyreek Hill has that kind of inside toss going the opposite direction, which is a nice design because he starts on the line. The safeties do a good job of reading, reacting. They're able to match concepts kind of consistently. So it feels like all year, really, Tish, how we've been talking about this Ravens defense kind of front to back, just doing a great job every week.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, from the Dolphins offense perspective, This was a game that ended up getting away from them, which, has happened a couple times against, these higher end defenses this year. And when we look ahead to next week and give a little preview to Bills Dolphins Sunday night for the division, which is there's not much more you can ask for from a game. I'm very excited for this game. I know you are as well. The Dolphins offense, they are, going to play a Bills defense that is right around 11th in EPA per play allowed this season after kind of going through a roller coaster to get there. And the Dolphins have the second best EPA per play in the league when they're facing a non-top 12 defense. That drops to 12th when they're facing a top 12 defense. So is there something that you see from the Dolphins that changes when they have to face one of these top end defenses, or is it more of just variance, do you think, from your perspective?
It's a good question. I think that whenever you face top defenses, your offense is going to look at least a little bit worse than when you're playing bottom end defenses. I will say that I do think not having Jalen Waddle there was a really big deal. I think Tyreek Hill is a little bit banged up. Obviously, our Tua has his shoulder kind of issues that seem to be lingering a little bit as well. I think McDaniel spoke about it, but I don't remember what the kind of final result on that was. I feel like teams are doing a good job of saying that the Dolphins are attacking just like points on the field. There is the way that things happen that fast for the Dolphins offense. Tua is kind of throwing it to a spot. So you'll see snaps a few times a game where it looks like Tua just totally missed Tyreek Hill by 5 yards. It's not like that Tua has shown any consistent issue in terms of accuracy or things like that, but he's anticipating that this specific spot is where the ball is going to go. And then from that, the Ravens and other teams like the Bills, I thought the Eagles even did a good job of saying, we're really going to fight against those specific spots. So you see a snap from the Ravens where they rotate their safety, and the safety pre-snap does not have to move because he lined up pre-snap exactly where Tyreek Hill's inbreaker would be. So it feels like the defenses are doing a little bit better job of understanding that. And then it just comes down to, okay, well, can you survive some of those deep shots where Tua threw a beautiful ball to Tyreek Hill on a vertical route, but when you get one of those a game, as opposed to 3 of those a game that end up in touchdowns, that really is able to flip things. I think Mostert was out in this game, if I remember correctly, too. Obviously, Achane is an incredible explosive player, which I think that'll be fun for the Bills defense to have to deal with. But yeah, I think overall that it's not like, oh, we've solved the Dolphins offense, but the Dolphins offensive line is not fully healthy. And as I said, the biggest takeaway, what it feels like on film, is instead of it's like a little bit of a non-traditional way to cover things where defenses are targeting, this is the area of the field that the Dolphins want to attack, as opposed to, this is the concept, or these are kind of the different things. Obviously, it just comes down to high level play there as well. But as we go forward, as you said, kind of talking about the Bills versus the Dolphins, that rematch. Tish, are you going to call this the game of the year? Yeah, I know you love a game of the year. Do you think that this has the potential to match that?
Yeah, well, I wrongly called Dolphins Ravens game of the year candidate after the first quarter, just because the first quarter was awesome, and then it kind of got away from the Dolphins there. But I could put a game of the year warning on this game for sure. Right?
If you think about it, all the games are game of the year potential, right? I mean, no matter what happens, all of it does. Obviously, this one has so many implications. It has a lot of hype kind of coming in. It's a rematch from that Week 4 game that we did talk about on this podcast, where in that games the Bills did an excellent job in their cover 2, doing things like I was saying, specifically targeting those routes, hammered down on those inbreakers. And Matt Milano did a good job eating up space inside. Obviously, he got hurt in that game. They lost their cornerback, Trey White. So the personnel, unfortunately, is not the same there. In that game, it did feel like McDaniel was pressing a little bit. He said it in the post game where they got out of their run looks pretty early. The Bills were able to put a lot of pressure on the offense by just constantly scoring. So I do think this is a game where we could see Achane on those outside runs, really, really test those cornerbacks again, where hopefully the game script is a little bit more kind of in the Dolphins' favor, especially the Dolphins being home and not having those same kind of communication issues. And that's something I think that we maybe underrate a little bit, where obviously the Cowboys are a team with such a huge home road split. I do think part of that, and I mean, McDaniel and Tua both spoke about this, is when you have such a motion-based offense, getting the motion in timed perfectly, it is a lot harder. Where Tyreek Hill, I think he said, sometimes you're guessing a little bit on when the ball is snapped. Obviously, you're always going to be guessing when you're looking the other way, but if you can't hear the quarterback, that does create some issues. So, Tej, do you have any initial thoughts on the Bills defense versus the Dolphins offense in this rematch?
One interesting angle that popped up when I was doing some matchup analysis was the Dolphins obviously use 21 personnel at the highest rate in the league when they put Alec Ingold on the field with either Mozart or Achan, and the Bills ranked 27th in EPA per play allowed against 21 personnel this season. So they're not good at defending it. They're particularly not good against the pass. So I fully expect Mike McDaniel to lean into that angle of things when they are facing, the Bills defense here. And that's going to open up Tyreek Hill's lanes, I think, is to put those two backs on the field. And then also when Buffalo plays a high rate of cover two, like they do, I think that the running back can be used in the passing game to kind of stretch the zones out there as well. So that's what I'm expecting for the Dolphins offense to do against the Bills.
Yeah, we'll see what the Dolphins' plan is in terms of when the Bills get into cover two. Is it go ahead, cornerback, see if you can make a tackle against Achan? Is it we're going to conflict those linebackers inside, high, and low, where I do think the Bills linebackers did well in that first game, but as I said, their personnel is going to look a little bit different. But flipping to the other side of the ball, Bills offense versus Dolphins defense. The Bills offense just was firing on all cylinders the first time they played the Dolphins defense. That was probably one of the early moments where we're like, oh, Bills best, could be the best team in the league. And then we just ride the roller coaster. I do think the Bills, they played the Patriots last week and struggled a little bit on offense. I think they played the Chargers the week before that, also had some struggles. It feels like there's the explosive element in the offense is a little bit watered down right now. In that first game between the Bills and the Dolphins, the Bills did a really good job of getting under center, getting to heavy formations. You're going to play one-on-one outside with Steph Diggs. We're going to take advantage of that consistently. So maybe that is something that we see a little bit more of. But like I said, missing that explosive element has been, I think, a little bit of a pain for the Bills. Tej, any kind of thoughts and feelings from what you've looked at so far in Bills offense versus Dolphins defense?
Yeah, like you mentioned, last time we saw this matchup, the Bills had a 99th percentile EPA per play performance. But I mean, you brought this up as well, but these teams are a lot different since that matchup. What's going to be really interesting is the Dolphins play the second highest rate of cover one in the league as charted by our friends at FTN Data. Josh Allen ranks sixth in EPA per dropback against cover one. Stephon Diggs is usually that go-to target against man coverage, but we're seeing a snap share decline, which I think is really interesting. He was on the field for 88% of snaps weeks 1 through 11, but he's only been on the field for 76% since then. So a 12 percentage point drop in that has been pretty big. So maybe it's a big Dawson Knox, Khalil Shakir game with Jalen Ramsey playing outside against Diggs or Gabe Davis. So they use the slot and tight end more with Dalton Kincaid, Knox, and Shakir. And so I think when you have that angle of things where maybe it's less Diggs and more of the secondary receiving options, James Cook works in as well. I think that's going to be the Bills' formula to go against this Dolphins defense.
Yeah, James Cook has been really fun to see just out of the backfield. I think we talked about him kind of 2 games ago. Tej, I want to close on this. So, of course, the Bills, they have their midseason offensive coordinator change. In those first few games, it felt like there was a little bit of a bump. Now they're maybe kind of evening out. As we said, the Eagles, they have their midseason defensive coordinator change. Do you have any kind of thoughts just overall, or maybe it's just a vibe check on this, but the midseason coordinator change, do you feel that that's a panic move? Do you think sometimes that's necessary? Do you have kind of any feeling one way or the other on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would probably, have more knowledge on this than me from a playbook standpoint, but from a number standpoint, I often don't think that a midseason coordinator change changes things that much. Like it's hard to exactly assign the residuals to like the Steelers offense, for example, where they change coordinators midseason. Their offense has had better performances, but is that Mason Rudolph? Is that the not having Matt Canada anymore? Is that just variance? Like, I think there's so many moving parts, and football is already such a low sample size sport to begin with, where you have 17 games to analyze in the regular season. So only making a conclusion off 8 of those 17 games is usually a lot tougher.
Yeah, I think that feels probably right. I do think that there's something to be said about sometimes it's, well, like what's the communication going on inside, whether it's a head coach needs to do something and kind of change things up. But when you're like the Eagles situation, they've said very clearly, hey, like Matt Patricia's not calling Matt Patricia's defense. Matt Patricia is calling the defense that Shawn Desai installed. which is tough, right? It's like if we were doing something where maybe one day we flip roles. We get you just grinding the all 22. I'll run the code. I don't know, R Python, whatever you want to use. And it feels different for like the Eagles defense. Sometimes feels like a bit out of place on the offensive side. I think there is something to be said about, play sequencing and kind of the feel of the game or when to call certain plays. But at the end of the day, you're still kind of calling the same structure. So it feels like that's the right read, where there might be some kind of non-quantifiable things that are able to be positive. But Tej, we're gonna wrap the show up. I mean, it's the new year. Any big New Year's resolutions, or it's just, New Year, same us, same podcast talking about new things?
New Year's resolution is great. I think, I'd probably want to take my my NCAA 14 road to glory quarterback to a national championship. I've failed him his first 2 years, so junior year now, got to make sure that happens for him.
Do you think in the new game, like, do we get like the transfer portal? Do we get to just like forget about the in-season recruiting? Like, I'm just going to spend kind of all my hours and just attack that portal and get 5 stars. What's your approach? Maybe me, you, and our buddies, we get together, do an online dynasty or something like that. But, Tej, I just feel like my defense is going to be able to stop your offense in that game.
Online dynasty would be a lot of fun. I think that you can really dip into the second order effects of like what Texas A&M has been doing, hogging all the best defensive linemen these past couple of years to make sure like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia isn't getting those defensive linemen. And so, I think that would be fun to do that if we had like an online dynasty conference realignment situation.
All right, Tej, once we start talking college football, that is the time for us to get out of here. So thank you, everyone, to listening to another episode of Stats and Scheme. Tell us what you like, what you didn't like, and if you think Tej will finally win the Natty in his road to glory, be sure to visit SumerSports.com. Follow us on Twitter @SumerSports. But most importantly, enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you next time.